Okay, well, welcome to our Refashion series, speaker series. We are very excited that you're here and that we have Robin Littlewing Sigo here with us tonight.
Oh, it's Sigo.
Sigo. Sigo. I keep doing that, I'm sorry. Just a small reminder that we have put out our call for artists for this year's Refashion show that came out today. So the show will be May 19th at Islandwood. So we're really excited to be bringing you another Refashion show.
Ooh, I'll be there.
And Robin will be there.
So excited.
As a judge.
That's right.
This will be her second year as a judge. We're very excited. So I wanted to give a land acknowledgement first. Every part and the rain
No.
of this soil. Every part of this soil is sacred in the estimation of my people. Every hillside, every valley, every plain and grove has been hallowed by some sad or happy event in days long vanished. Chief Seattle, 1854. We would like to begin by acknowledging that the land on which we gather is within the ancestral territory of the Tissaquab, people of clear salt water, the Suquamish people. Expert fishermen, canoe builders, and basket weavers, the Tissaquab live in harmony with the lands and waterways along Washington's central Salish Sea, as they have for thousands of years. Here the Tissaquab live and protect the land and waters of their ancestors for future generations, as promised by the Point Elliott Treaty of 1855. And in commemoration of that, any donations you make at this event will be divided between Sustainable Bainbridge and the Suquamish Foundation Land Fund, so that we honor the land treaty, the land acknowledgement in another way besides just saying it. So now I'm going to introduce Robin Sigo, Littlewing Sigo. She is a Suquamish tribal member, director of the Suquamish Foundation, and Saltfire Indigenous Centered Mental Health. She described herself as a researcher of love, a healer, and story catcher. Robin considers herself an auntie to every child, plant, and animal she sees. After receiving an undergraduate degree in cultural anthropology, Robin dove into tribal government work before going back for her master's degree in social work from the University of Washington. Over her professional career, she's been a grant writer, mental health therapist, research investigator, administrator, and trainer. These experiences led her to being elected to the Tribal Council, where she specializes in sovereignty, budget planning, community mental health, strategic planning, lobbying, philanthropy, and poverty alleviation. Robin just started a PhD program in visionary practice and regenerative leadership at Southwestern College in Santa Fe, New Mexico. Is there anything that you don't do? And she's a mom to 4 amazing kids. They keep her grounded and inspired. You'll usually find Robin collecting sweet moments, helping others tell their stories, and admiring everyone's style. And she started Sovereign Style to raise money for funding tribal improvements like a playground and to help tribal members share their clothing stories. And she was a judge at our fashion show last spring and again this year. So because of Robin's extensive breadth of experience, there was a wide variety of topics I wanted to discuss with her today. So we'll just get started.
Yeah, do it.
So first, I wanted to start with a story. Tell us how you ended up doing the work you're doing today, and what inspires you about clothing and textiles. And if you'd like, and I think you would, a story about something you're wearing today.
My goodness. And talk about everything I'm wearing, for the whole time. But I won't. I already got to share some of the stories, which was great. So, Hatzlahale, it's so nice to see everybody here tonight. I love the movies. Movies are one of my favorite things. So getting to be here in the movie theater and seeing all of you out here is really wonderful. So, let's see, how did I get here? I think it's a really good question, and it's a really big question, because I would say in terms of textiles and fashion, I have very fashion forward, grandmas. So I had like, so to my grandma Rose, my grandma Ollie, my grandma Stella, you know, all of them like had these really cool styles and decor, and they passed those on to their kids and, you know, down to me, and I got to like incorporate all of those. So I did make sure that like I have a rose something on tonight, and I have my squash blossom necklace that was my grandma Ollie's. And for my grandma Stella, I've got a cute little weaving over here because she liked little weaving things. So I think that there's all these like little ways that I can like incorporate family history into here. And I think a lot of times growing up, you saw a lot of people talk about fashion as though it's frivolous, and it's really not. Like, it's incorporated into everything we do. Like, we think about it to some extent of what we're gonna wear and what we're gonna present. And I think, you know, I had really great mentors in terms of this, like my Auntie Barbara, who's right here in the very front row. And, you know, she was this super cool, like, native punk, like, bohemian style that, like, I got to see that on an everyday basis. And her and my mom would braid ribbons into their hair and wear these long earrings and necklaces and cool wrap skirts. And, you know, they had like this Indian hippie punk vibe to them. And I got to be like the recipient of seeing that and feeling that and knowing that those things were really cool. And so this natural process of like falling in with friends who, you know, do that too. And then that process of going from regalia, like this ribbon skirt, which we were, and I think we'll talk about that a little bit later, like ribbon skirts, ribbon dresses, shawls, things like that, to a place of rediscovering what our Coast Salish fashions and textiles were, and getting to look at wool weaving and cedar weaving and shell jewelry, those types of things. So, and all of those led to here, this whole process of, you know, figuring out, you know, how to make this a part of my life. And now it's to a point where, you know, I'm in this PhD program with my friend Albie, who is up here somewhere. There she is. Yes, so it's great when you get to do this with friends. And so now I get to not only do this, but I also get to, like, explore fashion as a way to protect yourself, as a way to prevent burnout, as a way, as the creative part and that healing part, and getting back in touch with ancestors, you know, knowledge that we lost, that now we're going to kind of, or that I'm going to research how we make that connection again through my PhD program. And in terms of what I'm wearing tonight, there's so many things, because I was like, number one, it's nerve-wracking trying to come up with what you're gonna wear when you're talking about fashion, right? I feel like, you know, there's part of me that was like, what if I just like kick it up here in a pair of Docs and my jeans and a t-shirt, concert t-shirt, and then a cardigan, all good. And that would have been cool too, but it was like, you know, this is the chance to like layer it on and layer it on. And one of the things that I remember about potlatches that I learned was that, so we used to use dentillium, so these are these shells here as money. And one of the ways they would talk about when you'd go to a potlatch, that some people would have these dentillium, and the longer the dentillium was, the more it was worth. And nowadays we don't have super long dentillium because it's just not around as much here, and that habitat restoration still needs to happen. So, but they used to wear necklaces that would go all the way from their necks all the way down to the floor. And I was just like, oh, that would be amazing to see. So then today I was like, I'm gonna use that as inspiration and just like drape everything on. So I'm wearing a floor-to-ceiling dress, which this is from the Jamie Akuma collection. And she is, you should look her up, she's incredible. And she works out of LA. And it's like a family business where, you know, she and her family hand package everything up to send out. And she was one of the first Native Indigenous designers to really have collections that were coming out. She's featured all over the world, different places. She's famous for beating these amazing Louboutin boots. that turned out incredible that I had the pleasure of seeing a few years back. And then always the question, every day the question is, what earrings will I wear? And so I wore these by Jessie Old Coyote. And then I was like, felt again inspired by this old photo of this Indigenous woman here locally, and she's wearing a cedar hat, and then she just has these big abalone shells draped all over it. And so I was like, why don't I just put a bunch of earrings on my hat and use that as this, like, you know, just a modern day kind of piece of that. So yeah, so I have all of these by some of my favorite artists. Many of them are my friends. Other are ones that I, you know, stalk on Instagram and wait for their drops to come. And so I would say that's, and then I'll probably bring up other stuff along the way.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to remind people that there are note cards and pens, so if you have questions, we're going to talk for a while, and then if you have questions, you can write them on a note card and you can pass it up at the end to bring up questions. So my second question for you, as you started to talk about, was about sovereign style, which I think started in 2016.
2015. We figured out, yeah.
With Ribbons of Resilience.
Yes.
And was showcased older garments and new garments in the ribbon shirt and skirt tradition. And I wanted to know how you describe the kind of clothing people could see in the show, and ask what do you find is the importance of showcasing this kind of clothing, and then do you have plans for more of those in the future?
Ooh, okay. So Sovereign Style started when 2014 was when I actually started running the Suquamish Foundation. And it was one that had kind of been in hibernation. My dear friend Angela Fleming, she kept that going after our capital campaign to get our House of Awakened Culture and our museum and our dock built. It kind of went into hibernation, so they just met like once a year, and just to kind of check in and keep our 501c3 in place. And when I took over as the director of the Research and Strategic Development Department, I said, you know, one of the things I really want to take this job, and I really want to reawaken the Suquamish Foundation. And we did an annual art auction, which a lot of Native programs do. And it's a great way to raise money, to meet people. It's a beautiful night at Kayana Lodge, and I know a lot of people really enjoy going to it. But a lot of our tribal members don't go to that either because they can't afford it, or they don't feel comfortable there. So one of the things that I wanted to do was to make sure that we had a balance of events. Like, there's definitely a really important reason to have a time together, which is what our art auction was called. And it's a beautiful place to gather. We've done some really fun things with it. But the other part of it was, how do we make philanthropy more accessible? How do we make it so that the people that we're working with really feel empowered by the event, as opposed to feeling excluded from there? Because as somebody who's worked in philanthropy for a long time, the people who actually give the most, percentage-wise of their income, the people who volunteer the most, are almost always people that are in lower tax brackets. And so we need to really acknowledge those things that are happening. And so it was like, how do we make an event that my cousins and my aunties and my uncles want to come to? And one of the ways, and to showcase more than just, so here's the thing about getting ready for a powwow, is that, you know, it sneaks up on you. You volunteer for it, you're in the planning things, and then all of a sudden you're like, oh my gosh, my kids need a ribbon skirt or a ribbon shirt or a ribbon dress or a shawl or something. And so those 3 days before, you're like gathering materials, and late into the night, you were sewing these things on Thursday night so they'll be ready to run for Miss Chief Seattle Days Princess the next day, which, you know, my Auntie Barbara here did that for both me and her daughter the year that we were running. And I did that for my kids. It was like this tradition of like last minute, like, and what's cool about ribbon dresses and ribbon shirts is that they can be made pretty simply. And because there's so many different fabrics, you can really customize them for your kids. So like my nephew and my son are only a year apart, and they were really into fire trucks one year. And so I ended up getting this fire truck fabric from over here at Esther's and putting these different ribbons so they had matching ribbon shirts to wear. And my daughter really liked these pink flowers, and she picked out her own, and we made this ribbon dress for her. And it was all last minute. I was exhausted showing up, but I was so proud of them, and it was so great to see them. And so I knew that a lot of my aunties had those in their closets from their kids. And so just went around and asked if we could use the ones that they already had and then put them on other people. And then I went and talked to a couple different uncles and asked if we could use their ribbon shirts. And they were kind of surprised that I was putting them all on teenage young women with, like, they had these great leggings and they had these big shirts on and they looked super cool in all of these. And they're like, wow, these look pretty great. And so it was this process of really getting people to recognize their own artistry when they're creating with textiles, and then also reminding us of like how far we've come in that process of, you know, when the only thing we were allowed to wear was things like ribbon dresses, ribbon skirts, and but the other part, and because of those, a lot of things were outlawed for us, a lot of ceremonies, but one of the things that Indian agents and things would allow would be things like powwows because it looked nice to the white gaze. So that process of people saying, oh, look at how beautiful these Indians are when they do these dances, and it's entertainment a lot of times for non-native people, that so there's that piece of it, which, you know, it gives it that other edge, that part of like, oh, colonization. And then there's the other part where, what did our ancestors do? Well, my Auntie Peg told me this story about how during like these encampments that our people would be put into, that they would get these supply barrels, and in these supply barrels there would be a lot of like calico, like the same type of calico, but there'd be different types of ribbon inside. And so different families would get different colors of ribbon, and that would represent their family. And then she told me about how there would be, like, the different chiefs would have different, because we didn't have just one chief, just so everybody knows. It wasn't that much of a hierarchy. It was much more of a collective leadership model, that they would have ones that have a certain pattern, that then when they wore that, they knew that there was a secret meeting later that night to discuss other things going on. My gosh, and that was amazing. Like, that's a story that needs to be told. Like, the way that this fashion that, you know, that people had called me frivolous for enjoying as much as I did, was actually like this way of being really subversive, of overcoming things, of holding on to resilience in a structure, in an extermination era. Like, that was incredible. And then so when you start looking for those stories, you start seeing them all over the place. And the way that fashion has helped people survive, that's an incredible one. And I urge you all to kind of look for those places in your life. Like, you know, just the shirts you wear, the Black Lives Matter shirts, you know, all of these different ways that you can express yourself through this. I don't know if I answered all the questions.
Yeah, thank you. Well, the one thing you didn't get was, do you have plans to have another sovereign style sometime?
Yes, I think we definitely will be doing another one. I don't know when yet, though.
Yeah. People were asking me about my sweater, and this was what I made when they locked down for COVID. I had this very plain sweater plan yet, because I'm a very extensive knitter. Some might say obsessive. I'm not really sure how I define myself as a knitter, but I'm a constant knitter. And so I have plans. But this was just a complete shift from what I was doing. And I just started rifling through all my scraps and started knitting something completely different. And it was a way to help get through all the uncertainty of that time, all the fear, all the changes that were happening all the time. So I feel, and we've talked about this before, very strongly that textiles can be a form of resilience and can help you in many different ways. And so I think that's important to talk about. So going on with other programming that you work with, I was wondering about the healing of the canoe program that I found out about under Saltfire, and also the canoe journey. And you were talking about how that's been continued. And when you were talking about that, you were talking about the cedar clothing tradition. And I was really interested to know about how you go about having people make all this cedar clothing to recreate these journeys, and how that helps elder people pass down to younger people those traditions that have not been kept up as much, just that whole process, and maybe tell people who don't know so much about the cedar weaving traditions.
My goodness. I feel like I should be inviting my auntie up here to talk about it, because she is the first person that I knew who had cedar regalia. She had it for her wedding. I don't know what year that was. In the 80s? 1984. And there is this photo, and she worked in the museum and was one of the founders of the museum. And for people who don't know, she's Barbara Lawrence, so she's really amazing. Yes, and there was this beautiful woman all dressed for, wait, I'm mistaken, aren't I? It was a wool, was it wool regalia that you had?
Cedar with wool.
Okay, it was cedar and wool. And there's this photo in the museum, because her kids and all of us were like museum kids. Like when the Suquamish Museum opened, our families had been there. The Suquamish Museum, our parents all worked at, and it had the first VCR on the reservation. It was a beta. For those of you who don't know, those are the big giant videotapes. And it felt like we camped out there for the weekends. Like we would go there Friday nights, we'd get Pietro's Pizza from Paul's Bow, and then we would go there and bring like sleeping bags and things like that, and we would watch these videos that we rented from Viking Video while our parents worked and like created this whole museum, right? And half the time they weren't getting paid because there wasn't enough grant dollars to do it. They just did it out of this labor of love for our culture and our history. And so, not surprisingly, Barbara found this photo of this Suquamish woman getting ready for her for a ceremony, and she recreated it. And like, I didn't know that. Like before that, I just thought that we all wore ribbon skirts and shawls and things like that. I didn't even know like that Suquamish had this history of wool and cedar. And so getting to see that and getting to see the process of like her doing that. And so for people that don't know, so like my hat is made out of cedar. And cedar, sometimes I describe it as like our ancestors' duct tape. Like we used it for everything. It's so cool, all of the different things that you can do with it. And I mean, we made canoes out of it, and then out of the bark, we could strip off part of it, and the underside of the bark, we've used to weave this, and you have to think about it ahead of time, and it's a really like, when you're looking at ecology timelines, right? The eco clock, the nature's clock that's going on. Like, so when we see things like dogwoods blooming, we're like, oh, it's time to go collect cedar. And you can take this strip off of cedar and it will heal itself if you don't take too much. And then, so you have to have it, and then you have to cure it for a couple of years or a couple of seasons at minimum. And then you soak it, you have to separate it. It's a whole big long process. And then to soften it up, you can beat it and pound it and get out all your aggression on that. Or you can like weave it like this is, but then to make it really soft, and then you can put it over. And again, when the water falls on it, it's gonna fall right through it. Like we were just talking before this started about our ancestors were so brilliant. Like how is this not the perfect hat for the weather that we're having out there right now, right? Like, so it just goes right down, like, and I've worn these on the canoe and everything, so like it just falls right off. It doesn't really drip right through. It just keeps going. It's as though it were just made for this, and it was made for the sun, you know, so the sun isn't beating down on you. And it looks amazing. Like, these are my ancestors, people. Like, this is the level of innovation and style that we're talking about. And now I forgot even where I was going with this.
So coming back with making
Okay.
it now.
Oh, right. So making it now. So this process, right? So Peg and Barbara, like, they started bringing these things back to us, and then it started to go, it went slowly. And I think that getting together with the canoe journey and that process of just getting people together to do potlatches again, because that was illegal here until, was it 1979? 1978. Illegal. We couldn't practice. We couldn't practice our culture. We couldn't practice our religion. So that's in my lifetime, right? That's not that long ago. And so that step of actually being able to exert our own sovereignty, being able to exert our own culture and be proud of it, to walk through life feeling really proud of what you're doing without having to constantly worry about being attacked for being exactly who you are. And I wish I could say that wasn't still the case, but that is still the case. Like, we still have fishermen that, you know, guns get shot over their heads and stuff to scare them, and our clam diggers and things like that. So those things are still happening. I don't want to pretend like they're not, but we've gotten to a place where we exert ourselves more often and make sure that people know we're here. And that's the process of walking through with a cedar hat, right? I'm not a shrinking violet if I have this. Even if I feel like one on the inside, I put it on and I'm carrying my ancestors with me. And so I think that piece of feeling really connected to what you're wearing, feeling really connected to regalia, feeling like, oh, I want to be able to make that. And so as we prepare for the 2029 canoe hosting in Suquamish, it's a goal of Suquamish to wear cedar regalia. And that process of getting ready for it means that we have to be gathering cedar, we have to be curing cedar on a regular basis, we have to be teaching people how to make it and how to care for it in those fashions. So that's something we're going to be working on for, you know, the next, oh my gosh, less than 6 years now. And so, yeah.
Thank you. So, yeah, really slow fashion.
Yes.
So this is really an antidote to the fast fashion that
Yes.
we also talk about in a not such a good way.
Right.
Yes. So yeah, so I was kind of thinking about how that is preserving historic skills and passing forward skills that really didn't get to be passed forward for a long time, but did not die out completely. And some people can still do it and recreate it, and that's so wonderful that those textile skills can be revived and can be passed forward. And then when we were talking about that, you were saying how making other things, you can just go to fabric stores, you can go to Esther's, you can go to Joann's and just pick out fabric, which is a faster process for us. But then when we think about that, we don't really think about where those fabrics are made, especially now, which is often in developing countries, often with people who have lost their fiber traditions as fast fashion has come in and as we've just changed our textile production so much in the world. So many cultures have textile traditions that have been dying back a lot because of mass production, overproduction of mass-produced fabrics. So on that vein, I was just thinking about how if we don't preserve those traditions, what we lose, and what do you think we gain from preserving them and from keeping them going?
I think that there's, a lot of things. My mind is kind of swirling with all the possibilities. Right, well, I think I'm going to go back a little bit to that ecology clock and that looking at nature Because one of the things I heard when I was just working with our culture department last week was that now when the dogwoods blossom, and that was always our indicator for that was the time when the sap had pulled enough away from, was moving enough so that when we stripped off a piece of cedar bark, the sap wasn't attached to it right then. That was the indication. But because of climate change, now it's 2 to 3 weeks after that, which is actually the time. Like we are adjusting all those time things, we're adjusting that natural clock. And part of that is, you know, the manufacturing of the way we do things like fast fashion, things the way we're doing fabric, but also then the biggest issue of that is how they're being shipped over here, right? They're being shipped in these giant containers that, or these giant ships that the eco footprint of that is so immense, and I feel like I should have prepared myself for what that actually is because I'm astonished by it every time. But anytime we have that, right? Anytime we find that really good deal on things like that, it's often at the expense of the environment. And so finding out, being able to utilize something like, you know, we have some people like Joey and Danita Holmes in our tribe who have actually like started like carding wool, mountain goat wool, and sheep's wool, and then spinning it, and then weaving with that, right? So that's like the new process, right? So one of the nice things about having things like Joanne's or Esther's right there to be able to go get things means that we can teach more people and we can teach them faster, and there's that process for, you know, when teenagers are interested in learning how to do it, we're like, here you go, you can do this, and it's really fast. And then you get to this point where, I don't know, as I get older, like, I want the slower one. I want the one that's more high quality, you know. I want the Barbara Lawrence cedar hat, those types of things that you're willing to take the time. You recognize that time and energy that goes into something, that's the most important part. And so I'm really like teaching people why that's important. It's not hard to do, right? Because you get to have, it's part of community knowledge and part of that process of learning and growing as a tribe, right? Where we get to be at the point where we don't have to just focus on survival skills anymore. And part of why Albie and I created the Saltfire nonprofit is because we want to look at the Indigenous-centered mental health and the innovations that can come from the part where we're no longer in survival mode. And if we're not in survival mode, we get to use our creativity not just to survive, but to innovate, to change, and to showcase that, to showcase Native innovation, right? And then we start talking about futurism, and we start talking about Indigenous futurism and Black futurism, and those things where we get to see, like, how do you create those connections between ancestral knowledge and where you are now when some of those things were lost? And so how do you sit there and hold this space where you can hear your ancestors and you can hear future generations telling you what's next and what's possible? And I think that's one of my favorite things about getting to, you know, sit in a space of being a healer, mental health counselor, as somebody who catches stories from people, and people like to share stories, and I like sharing stories with them, that it's like, I want to find that spot where I can sit in this present moment and hear those stories from the future and the past. And I want to teach others how to do that as well.
That was yeah. That's wonderful. I just want to go back just a minute to have you talk a little bit more about Saltfire, because I'm not sure everyone here knows about that organization and what you've been doing with the mental health in the tribe.
So originally, I wanted to become a mental health counselor. We have this amazing woman who is from Bainbridge Island. Her name is Lori Glover, And if you know Lori, she was wonderful, and she worked for the tribe for over 25 years as a mental health counselor. She's a non-native woman who really came in, and she was the first mental health counselor ever hired by the tribe. And when people were very skeptical of going in to see a counselor, and she had this way. I remember somebody has described it as, I just want to always feel the way I feel in Lori's office. I feel important, I feel heard, and I feel confident. And it's like, oh, you can't ask for a better ally than that. And so, having seen her as a family when I was young, and then worked with her when I was a grant writer, it was like, I want to do what Lori Glover does for people. And so I went and I got my master's degree at the UW, and I came back to work, and my plan was to be a mental health counselor, and I called it my cute shoe job, right? Because all things loop back to fashion for me. And I was like, you know what? If during the day my job is to walk to the waiting room and then walk back to my office, then I can wear the cutest shoes ever, right? It doesn't matter if they're uncomfortable because I don't have to wear them very long. And in my office, I can even take them off and put on cozy slippers or something. They're too bad. But when you're a grant writer who's also a program manager and a mom, you're wearing comfy shoes that you can run around in. And so I had my cute shoe job, and I was really excited to do that. And then I started doing research kind of work. It was during the evidence-based practice push, and so started working on healing of the canoe, and we were developing a body of research having to do with how culture is a protective factor, and community connections, and all of those things have all of these great health benefits. And then I started doing the mental health thing, and then I started doing the research thing, and so then I was having more meetings again, and it's okay, I can still wear heels, but they have to be kind of comfy heels, chunky heel kind of things. And then, I started doing, I started running the program. I became the administrator of the program and doing this other one, and crisis intervention. So basically it was back to wearing really comfy shoes. Right now, I'm wearing Docs right now because Docs are great, and you can do everything. You're such a badass in them, right? They're stylish, and then they're also you could really kick ass in them if you needed to. So I don't have the cute shoe job, even on nights like tonight where it would have been the perfect night to bust out some heels. When you look outside, you're like, that is just not the way this is gonna go. And now what was my... Oh, Saltfire, right? So Saltfire, there's always this spot of when you're writing grants, when you work in philanthropy, when you want to save the world, where you're I should probably start a nonprofit. And so there's been a lot of conversations, and Angela Fleming, who's not here tonight, but her son is here, Jojo is here, and Albie and I always had so Angela and I have been friends since we were in the 6th grade. Albie and I have been friends since we were I was 23 or something when I met her, and now I'm almost 50. So we've been friends for a long time, and we work together too. And technically I'm their boss, but that's not really how it goes. We definitely have a shared leadership style and call each other out on stuff as we need to. So we've thought of things. We've been on a lot of boards. We helped start Kids Up Strong way back when. And our friend Christina Rourke is over here, who runs Kids Up Strong now, in a collective leadership, of course. She's also on our board for Saltfire. And so it was what do we want to do? What do we want to do next? And one of the things is that our Healing of the Canoe program that we developed, and that was an 11-year grant with the National Institute of Health. And what we found was we didn't have the number of people needed to make it an evidence-based practice, but it's a promising practice, which is enough for people to get grant funding, which was our goal. So we started training people in this process on how to adapt a curriculum. And, we had funders that sought us out and said, you should do that. You should have this nonprofit. And, you know, Albie worked her magic, and we're like, okay, let's do this. And we worked with a really great nonprofit attorney out here, Nancy Plant, and we got references from our friend Cole Medina to go and talk to her. Like, all of this thing, like, you know that saying where it's like the universe conspires to make it happen if you're gonna follow it, and if you don't, it kind of kicks you around a little bit, and then you get back on track and you're like, this is the way it's supposed to be. Well, Saltfire was all of that and continues to be. So, you know, we have a program where we work with youth and doing kind of youth empowerment projects, and I don't know, we have a bunch of cool projects that are just coming up, and we'll kind of see where they go, like, while we do other full-time work and work at, you know, do our PhDs. So we kind of have a lot of things going on, and we'll see what that process looks like.
Okay. Okay, thank you. So we were touching a little bit on how mental health and dressing can be related. Mm-hmm. And we have talked about that. And we also talked about sort of the ceremony of dressing ourselves, and how you were saying that pretty much everything is a ceremony for you. And that was interesting to me because that's sort of a Jewish way of seeing the world also. So I was just wondering if you wanted to talk about how dressing for different things ends up being kind of a ceremony. We talked about dressing for difficult work, dressing for battle, dressing for celebration, and how that's maybe changed as time has gone by. I was allowed to use my husband as an example. He's here today, about how dressing has changed so much in our lifetime. The formality of dressing has changed, what people wear out. He is a physician, and he used to wear almost, you know, his people before him would wear like a suit and tie to work to see patients. And then he would wear a shirt and tie, no jacket. Mm-hmm. And then the pandemic came, and he would wear a short sleeve shirt so he could clean further up on his arms. And now he wears scrubs to work. So just that ceremony has changed a lot. But I mean, how you think that works in our everyday life, and what that means for how people view clothing.
Yeah. This is one of my favorite questions. So thank you for that. I think, so my mom is a musician, and she and my stepdad had a band for a long time. So some of my earliest memories are my mom getting ready for different things. And I think a lot of people share that story of having, like, watching their moms getting ready, and just the ritual of it. Like, I always liked, my mom used to wear a Naya perfume, and it smelled so good. It just smelled like my mom, and I loved that. And I loved, like, the process of watching her put that on and deciding which jewelry she was going to wear. And because she was a musician in the 1980s, she also got to wear, like, cool makeup too. I mean, she was a bluegrass primarily musician, but she wore cool makeup, and she just, and her mom was like that too. So when I'd go down to California to see my grandma Ollie, it was the same thing. Like, I loved sitting there and watching her get ready. And so I don't think we think of those things as ceremonies, but I think the older I get, the more I recognize those as ceremonies and the intentionality of it. And before I got on council, but really when I got on council, I was on there for 9 years. I retired from that about 1.5 years ago. And it was at that point when I knew that I had to think about those things more. I needed to be really intentional. I had gotten burnt out from doing mental health counseling. It's hard to carry people's stories, especially their trauma stories. And that was my specialty, was that I was going to work with people who experienced trauma. I was going to work with people who had borderline personality disorder traits. And people are like, isn't that hard? I'm like, no, these people are amazing. And these stories that they tell and that they carry are so heavy. and it hurts a lot. And so I found, like, I've always worn statement pieces. I was like the kid who was like wearing tons of bangles when I was like in the 5th grade. So I always appreciated those. I always wanted to be Wonder Woman because she had all the cool accessories and she was super cool. So I used her as an example. Like when she's like deflecting bullets with her bracelets, that's so cool. And so as I started thinking about it, I started thinking about that process of how do we protect ourselves, and having like this statement jewelry, right? I've got this right here and it's protecting my heart. So, but it still lets me take those stories. Like I always think of it as these stories nestling into whatever it is that I'm having, so I don't have to like embody the whole thing of it and carry that heaviness, but I get to hold it in a really safe spot. So those stories get to go inside here. And then I had a great mental health counselor who's also here on Baybridge, Mary Stoll. She's since retired, and I hope she's doing so well because she's wonderful. But she would say, you know, when you get home, I think it's because I don't have a long commute. I think it's really important. I told her I love driveway time. So like I sit in my car, like I know probably a lot of people do. When they get home. But also she was like, when you go home, I think it's important that you change out of your work clothes so that you actually get this process of like switching selves, moving away from work. Because I'm somebody who, you know, grew up and I wanted to be the model Indian. I wanted to be the one who did really well in school and got the really good job, drove a Toyota, you know, all of these things that I thought meant middle class. Like that was all I could dream of, was just being middle class and paying my mortgage on time and all these things, and to seem acceptable to people. And that's a terrible thing to like admit now, but that was really what I was doing. I was trying to seem like I was acceptable to the white gaze again, right? And so that process made it so that I really had to think about, you know, I had to think about what I was doing at all times. So the process of getting home and like taking off my jewelry, changing my clothes into something more comfortable really meant that I could feel that shift. And what I found is that I didn't need to take off, like I didn't need to change clothes completely. But I did have to, like, I took off, like sometimes in my car, I'll just take my earrings off because it's just been a really long day. And I'll take the necklace off, I'll take that jewelry off, and I can feel the weight of it leaving. The power of those stories is still there with me, but I get to take it off. And so when I do, like, I think about it today, like all of those things, like every single thing that I'm wearing, including the docks that I bought I bought from somebody here on Baybridge. I'm having lots of Baybridge. I forget about how many of those I have. So, like, those types of stories that I get to carry with me, but I also don't have to hold at all times. And I think that part's really important. So, I have been a foster mom. I sit on the board for the National Indian Child Welfare Association, and I do a lot of work with case managers, social workers, foster parents, biological parents, and it's just a lot to do that sort of work. And so that's always my self-care advice, is invest in a piece of statement jewelry for yourself. And hold that there, let it carry some of the stories, and then have that process of taking it off, and actually have that as a ceremony that you can have, a mindful one, right? Because you can't be a mental health counselor and not talk about mindfulness, because it's so good for you. So.
Thank you. And I was just thinking that as we've gotten so much more casual often, and in our clothing, we don't have as much of that separation between like clothes kids wear for school and what they change into when they come home, or clothes you wear to work and what you change into. And maybe that has something to do with the fact that we're always working, that we don't change, we don't have separation of those things, which is so important for mental health, is having maybe some more boundaries and some more limitations. So I wonder how our ceremonies have changed certainly in our lifetime.
Right.
They're,
Yeah, I think that process, I mean, what I want to do is talk about the horrors of capitalism and how, I mean, like Albie and I were just having a lunch meeting today, and we were talking about people should not be working in December. This is not the time to be working. This is the time to be making soup and making things, having ceremonies, checking in with friends, sleeping more, doing all of those things, right? Looking again at that eco clock and seeing like what should we actually be doing at this point in our lives if we didn't have electricity, making it so that we have to be working at least 8 hours a day, and then the expectation is that we actually work more than that we're always thinking about it, that we're always doing that our kids are always in school trying to study for a test instead of, and always having homework instead of getting to just come home and like cook dinner as a family. How many activities? I mean, there were definitely some advantages to COVID and having the eye-opening experience of what does it look like if we're just home? What if we're not scheduled to the max? And, this swing back of like, ooh, how can we get busy again? Ooh, we have to be together all the time. Instead of the process of really being selective on what we're gonna do. And so, yeah, are we always working? Yeah, we kind of are. Do we get to dress up for things? Yeah, I mean, I'm somebody who, I will always say, I love a good theme. Give me a good theme and I'll be happy to dress up for it. Because that's really fun. But it's also, that process of, what do we need to be wearing? Like, I always think of like the suit and tie and everything, and like they automatically had, like, it definitely feels like armor, like when you put it on, right? There's a separation. That tie goes right over that part. Your jacket goes over your heart. Shoulder pads.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. All those things.
Yeah. Gosh, we're running out of time, and I have so many more things to talk to you about, so we're going to have another
Okay.
conversation. But let's see, we should have one more question, and then if people have questions and they want to pass them forward, there are some people who I think we're going to collect questions, so we'll see how that is. Well, I'll ask this question that has always been interesting me lately about cultural sharing and cultural appropriation. We talked about this a little bit together, but I know you can't answer for everyone, but personally, your opinion about wearing the patterns, the symbols, the fabrics of other cultures, and how that line is drawn between what is appropriate and what is appropriation, and how we can share each other's cultures without offending people and not understanding the meaning and background.
It's a great question. And actually, I posted a couple times to my story on social media specifically about, yes, it's okay for non-Indigenous people to wear Indigenous jewelry and things like that, with the caveat of, who did you get that from? Like, you go and, buy it from an Indigenous artist. Wear that proudly. I love getting a good deal. And I think a good deal is paying full price to artists. Like, I don't dicker with artists. I don't change. If they tell me that's the price, then that's the price. If Walmart gets to say this is what the price is, and we're not saying that's not really the price, then I'm not gonna do that to artists. And people are like, well, artists move up the price so that they charge more because they think you're going to negotiate down. I'm like, well, then I'm the person who gets to pay extra for that, and I feel so fortunate that I'm in a place to do that. So, yeah, buy from Indigenous people and wear their stuff. Wear it proudly. Tell people where you got that, and that you paid full price. Those are really good things. That's a way to be a supporter, and then take it even further and become an ally. Support that person. Send them extra money. I always send money for caffeine. I'm not really a coffee drinker, so I don't usually say coffee. I just say, here's some caffeine or whatever it is that keeps you going during that day, and I pay them really quickly. So I have one person, Janica Old Coyote, who she makes amazing beaded jewelry, and she was like, oh yeah, I love doing stuff for you, Robin, because you always pay really quickly too. And I'm like, yes, that's what I want. I want like artists that I support to really think of me as somebody who supports them. And so, like people buy cedar, non-native people buy cedar hats, and if an indigenous person is selling that, then go for it. Wear those things. Wear it respectfully. I think that where you get those things, there's ways to repatriate things too. Like if you come across things, if you feel like your family has things that maybe they didn't get in the best way, that there's ways to do that. I don't know all those ways, but I had somebody reach out because they had found an eagle feather and they were non-native, so they're like, I can't have this, but can I gift this to you? And it was really kind. I'd never had that happen before, and it was really wonderful. So yes, so wear those things, wear indigenous things. There are a lot of great articles. If you look at there, Bethany Yellowtail, who's an indigenous artist, has a really good blog post on it. 8th Gen, which is a local 8th Gen, which is owned by the Snoqualmie tribe. It was started by Louis Gong. They have a great thing on their website about it. Those are great companies to support. BEMA has been having a lot of different art shows, and they've had a lot of different indigenous artists there. Coming up this next weekend at the House of Awakened Culture in Suquamish, there's going to be a bazaar, and I'm actually going to be bummed to be out of town to miss some of the things that I've seen people creating, so.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm going to look at the question. Oh, there's a lot of questions, so I think Shirley has more questions. Thank you. Okay, so this question goes off of that, which is, can non-native people weave cedar? What do you think about that?
I think non-native people can weave cedar. I think it's how you're going to do that. Who's your market? I know that there's Melinda West is an amazing woman that I've known for a long time, and she's happy to teach anybody. And part of it is that we lost these things that we weren't allowed to practice. There's people, Vi Hilbert, who's the teacher, the holder of Lushootseed language for such a long time, and she had basically said, I'll teach anybody because I need this language to continue. But I don't know, I feel like it's a complicated question, and I don't really know the full answer. I think that, can you weave it to appreciate it? So I'm in this PhD program, and I think that if I'm going to be writing about different types of jewelry, that I need to know how to do it, not because I'm going to sell it, but because I need to know what that process is like to appreciate it. And so I think there's definitely ways to do that. I think that Barn out here does a really good job of offering those things by indigenous teachers. There's a lot of different cultures that have, we were talking about that, right? Different textile weavings and things. I had the opportunity to go with the Seattle Aquarium to Bali, and they do so much weaving there. So many things were so similar. I went this last summer to Norway and got to see all the different baskets techniques that they had there. And so, yes, weave cedar if there's enough resources so that indigenous people can do that. I would probably say is a good way to go about it. But indigenous people they weren't the only weavers of barks and woods and things like that. So I'd encourage you to find out what your families were, what your traditions were.
That's such a lovely thing to look into. I think that for a long time, there were a lot of non-native people taking on skills, and still happens today. I know with the Japanese textile traditions of shibori, that there's people who will go and learn and then teach and have a business and have, make their living off of teaching these skills that didn't come from their culture but came from another culture. So I can see that being somewhat problematic. But also, there are so many traditions that are somehow interwoven and really hard to trace back exactly where those traditions came from. And traditions do end up colliding and mixing for thousands of years. So I think those things can be really complicated, but I think the idea of making sure there's enough and not overusing and not profiting off of someone else's work and someone else's tradition is really important.
Right. Yeah, I think the other part is that I just think that all of our ancestors wanted to learn more. And so I feel like if they met each other, generations ago, that they would say, oh, how did you do that? And they would have shared those types of things. So I think that sometimes like you meet somebody and I like to think of it as, ooh, I think our ancestors would have been friends. Like they would have shared this type of cultural knowledge together and been inspired by one another as opposed to appropriating, like making it your own as opposed to. But yeah, I think the resources part, just as we're looking at, running out, honestly.
Yeah, that's important to remember. I had this question too, so I'm glad someone else asked it. Could you explain about dentalium? What is it, where it was found, and well, I don't know if you can explain all this, but how it was harvested and gathered and how it's made into jewelry.
My gosh, it's like you're looking into like what I'm going to be looking at for one of my classes in my PhD program, because I don't know the answers to all of those. What I do know is that dentalium are, they're sometimes called a tooth snail, and they're bivalve, so similar to a clam. And they used to be all around here and in like across the world, all over these oceans and everything, and particularly the white ones. And now when you're looking for longer ones, what you might find is these green ones that are found like in the Philippines and a couple places down in Africa. And so I haven't actually made any dentalium jewelry or anything yet, so I don't have that experience. I stopped over to visit Albie the other day, and she and her sister and her daughter were all making things together, but I hope to find out more.
Someone just asked if Saltfire is looking for board members.
Aww.
So I think you might have some supporters out here. Is that?
We're not currently looking for board members, but we'll always take supporters. So, yeah, we would love to hear from you. Drop us a line. You should probably drop Albie a line. She's much better at checking her email. Albie@saltfire.org.
So I was hoping after this talk to you, you can send me some of the names of the artists and people you mentioned so that we can post them on our website and social media. I'm sure people will want those. I have, here's a question. If or when you struggled in school or work, what did you draw on to sustain and keep you going?
Oh, that's a good question. I think in the moment I would have to say like always my kids, always like, if my ancestors got through all of this, I can get through this too. And I just, I sometimes see people and they'll say this like, fuck my life kind of thing, right? FML. And I always think that's such a funny statement because I've never been able to say something like that to myself without some voice inside me saying, really? You think it's that bad? It is not that bad. And so it's not always the most compassionate voice that I have in my head, but it is a very realistic one. And it's a realistic one that tells me like, we're just gonna have to keep going. There's another path. There's this part that I creatively think about what's next and that maybe something better has come along. And there's so many things, like so many times in our healing of the canoe journey where it seems like, oh, this is a dead end. The school that we were working with has all of a sudden, the tribe decided to close it for a year and then reopen it a year later. And that meant that we wouldn't be able to run through the curriculum with the students we had planned on. And then all of a sudden it turns out that, when we started thinking about what are alternatives, we had the best alternative. And we came up with this best solution that ended up being better than anything else that we had done. And by better, I mean the community responded to it better. It was much more community focused at that point. And so I think I let myself be sad about it. I let myself feel all the feels and then move forward. Like something else is coming up. I have to keep going, and I'm going to.
Just gonna go back. I have this question I'm not sure you can answer about the woolly dog. Is that a tradition you about?
What about the woolly dog?
Just sharing. So this is just a basic share about the woolly dog, but probably about the textiles.
Oh my gosh. So I'll just say I had this dog named Xanadu that was a little Shih Tzu, a little white Shih Tzu, white and brownish black tricolored Shih Tzu that I got while I was in school, and my mom helped me get it, and I was in undergrad, and I was tired, and I was like, I can't find a dog that I can have in my apartment, and listen, so I was like, I found this one, but it's like $150, which of course, when I was 2019, that was like the most expensive thing I could imagine. And so she was like, I'll pay for half of it. You should go get that dog for your birthday. And I went out and did it while I was completely sleepless. And then, right, why am I talking about this dog named Xanadu? After the Xanadu, like Olivia Newton-John Xanadu song, for the record. I'm talking about it because what I found out, like when I was coming home, was there's this, somebody had started talking to me about these woolly dogs that the Suquamish Coast Salish people used to have, and were these little tiny dogs that had hair like the Shih Tzu rather than having like shedding hair. They grew this long hair. And we actually used to keep them here on Bainbridge Island, and this was like the place where we'd keep our dogs, and like not the ones that would be there in the long houses, but so they would come and they'd talk about, like, if you get a chance, look up woolly dogs, and the article that comes up by Haiku magazine is so good, and Jeffrey Verigi did the illustration for it, and it's so good. And so they would shear these dogs, and they would have them they would turn that into wool, and then they would use them to make to make wool capes and skirts and blankets and things like that. And there's one over at the National Museum of the American Indian, and we had a group of elders that actually got to go out and see that there, and but sadly they became extinct due to explorers coming over here. Captain Vancouver, actually, there's one of the artists that was on board with him actually like documented and saw that they were there, but they got hunted and got rid of them, and so we don't have them anymore, sadly. But I had my little, so I always feel like part of the reason I was drawn to this little dog was because it was like the ancestral part of me saying, oh, here's this. But you know what? I never did make anything out of his fur. I haven't done that, so.
Are people bringing back any of that tradition with other dogs? I know there are people who are taking dog fur and cat fur and spinning and weaving with it, but is that something that's happening in your community?
Not that I know of. I haven't heard of
anybody doing that with their dog's fur. It doesn't mean it's not happening, but could. I mean, I love the idea of it.
So there was another thing, I have a couple more minutes left, and there was another thing we talked about that I wanted to bring up here as we are Refashion, which is the idea that, this is kind of a shift, about thrifting and how the view of thrifting has changed so much in our lifetimes and changed among people who either had to thrift, but now thrifting is cool and that's changing what's available. And just the idea of, as we've been talking about the meaning of clothes and the ceremony of clothes, how we change our mindset around having to have new, around this fast fashion, around having to have clothes that are shiny and never been worn before, and how being mindful and wearing worn clothes can kind of go together.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely grew up like we always had hand-me-downs. we always went, my Auntie Delore called it snooping. We'd go snooping with her, which meant we went to Sally's, Salvation Army, and we didn't have a Goodwill around here for a long time. So it was like St. Vinny's and Sally's were the two places that we would go, and then to garage sales. But it was like, I remember getting teased for not having new clothes. Like for school, I would get one brand new outfit, and my dad would take us once a year down to the Tacoma Mall, which I thought was so cool. And we'd get one new outfit that we could wear, and then sometime my birthday was in October, so then we would go, and sometimes I would get an outfit from the JCPenney's out in Bremerton before the mall opened. But yeah, so growing up where it wasn't that cool, and then it hit my stride right in high school when grunge came along, and it was suddenly it was oh, okay, yes, I have all of these things, and I know, then it was cool to go thrifting and everything. Flash forward to my twins getting ready for homecoming, and it was the first thing, it was well, we all gotta go to Goodwill and see what we can find at Goodwill. And so, we all went there, and one of them may have found a beautiful dress to wear to homecoming, and one of them may have also found a beautiful fleece dragon onesie that they wore to homecoming. So, I think, and, they could have picked anything. They could have said, my oldest daughter, she totally wanted to go to Bonita's in Silverdale and pick out her homecoming dress, right? So hers was new and shiny for sure, but from a local place. But also, having grown up where, we were poor, and so we, finding a good deal at, Target or something like that was certainly something that was part of our lives. But, I love that my kids, their first response is, how do we go through? Let's go thrift shopping for this. And I found that, the thrift goddesses provide when you're I really want this. Then you go through, and it was we all come from hunter-gatherer societies. So it's really kind of this taps into what can we find there and see, and what's special about it. And there is a great book that's very irreverent called it's called A Dirty Job, and it's by Christopher Moore. And while it's not for all people, one of my favorite parts about it is that it talks about you're going to get these soul objects in these different used record stores or thrift shops or all of these different used places, and that somebody who knows how to collect them will see them and they kind of shine, and they're supposed to go to make sure that they get shepherded to the right person. So I remember reading that book and just being yes, that's why I'm here. This object has a story. This is supposed to go to me, and then it's supposed to probably go somewhere else. But right, with the fast fashion, it's just nothing's going to last that long. So it's not going to be there for generations after generations.
Except in the trash pile.
Right.
I don't think fast fashion is a soul.
Yeah.
But no, I just because I'm Refashion, had to just bring out some statistics about there's 15 to 45 billion garments annually that are created and not sold. So we have a huge problem with this. I mean, this is our drum that we beat, but it is, we don't have really any idea how many garments we're making at that quick rate, because businesses don't have to say, and because they don't really relate how many things are made to how many are needed. The whole idea of need has changed in our society, and one of the places that suffer, I mean, there's many places that suffer from this, like in Atacama Desert in Chile, an expansive field of discarded clothing so large it can be seen from space. That's primarily made in China or Bangladesh. So, that I just want to bring back here as this event is in December, and we're all gift giving and thinking about those things, and just how we've been talking about the importance of clothing and the soul that's in things, and how people have made clothing with such intentionality for so long, and learning and passing forward these skills, how we just think about that as we go forward. And if there's other things you would like to say in the last few minutes. that we didn't get to say?
Let's see. Yeah, you know what? I think I want to share this story because it's about to come full circle for me, which is at the beginning of COVID, all these museums started putting their collections online. And I thought it was great. It was one of the things that, like, I love going to museums. Obviously, as I said earlier, I was raised in a museum, so that means a lot. And I remember my sister Lydia had posted a link to the British Museum and their collections. And when I went in there and I looked up Suquamish, I found that there were these bracelets there, and they were taken from here by Captain Vancouver from Restoration Point. And I was like, oh my gosh, these bracelets are so cool. And I've always loved bracelets. Like I said, like I was like 4th, 5th grader coming to school with bangles on, and you know, my grandma bought me this really cool Egyptian style bracelet that I just thought was the coolest thing. And so I was like, look at, my ancestors thought that bracelets were really cool too. Like it felt like, you know, this part of like, yes, like this connection is so much more. Like, again, when people act like fashion is frivolous, right? It's frustrating, and sometimes I needed to look for confirmation that it really wasn't. And this was one of those things, and so getting to see it, and I had never been to Europe before, and had the pleasure of going with my partner last fall. And I was there and again, a lot of the things in the British Museum, right, are just stolen from other places. And so my partner introduced me to a really amazing tattoo artist named Boff, and he does hand-poke tattoos. And I showed him some photos of the bracelets that were there, and I said that I wanted one. And so he gave me this amazing tattoo right here. They got my birthday last year. And right now, actually tomorrow, one of my twins and I are headed over to London to go and see our oldest daughter, Kylie, who's over there for school. We're gonna go and stay over there, and one of Kylie's professors works at the British Museum, and she and Kylie work together, so we are actually gonna go see those bracelets in person this next week. And so I feel like, you know, that was one of those things where it's all coming full circle. We're getting to go and see it, and maybe not get to take us with us this time, unless, like, if you see on the news or something that there's a big hubbub there, you'll be like, oh my gosh, Robin. And you'll cheer me on and, like, do a GoFundMe to help me get an attorney and all of those things. But,
We don't know where it went.
Right, we have no idea. Just, like, slipped it on somebody's wrist and out we walked. But yeah, so that'll be my final story. But thank you guys so much. This was just wonderful.
Thanks so much. Thanks everyone for coming out tonight.
Thank you. Drive safely, everybody.